Welcome back, everyone, to Beat the Big Guys. I'm your host, Sandy Rosenthal. And today we're going to have a very, very special conversation with Andreanecia Morris. Hey, Andreanecia.
Hi, Sandy.
I'm so happy to have you here. And I've wanted to have you on my show for a long time, but today there's a very, very special reason that I'm glad you're with me today. And we're going to talk all about that. But first, I'm going to introduce our listeners to you. Okay?
Okay. All right.
Andreanecia Morris is the executive director of Housing NOLA, president of the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance, as well as chairwoman of Housing Louisiana. Ms. Morris, you must be exhausted.
Yes, I'm a little tired.
Andreanecia has dedicated her career to the pursuit of a more equitable and accessible housing market in the city of New Orleans and beyond. In New Orleans, housing inequality is an ongoing crisis which disproportionately afflicts marginalized communities with housing insecurity, unsafe living conditions, and homelessness. The inequality itself is the consequence of a wide array of systemic failings. To combat this multifaceted issue, Andreanecia's approach is varied. Her organization raises awareness in the general public, fosters engagement in at-risk communities, and works to hold elected officials at the city, parish, and state levels responsible for prioritizing profit over human lives. This is absolutely fabulous life's work, and it's an honor to meet you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I appreciate that. It has been my life's work. It feels like my calling at this point. And I know you understand that.
Oh, I do. And not everything that one does is something that they've known they've wanted to do since they were 10 years old.
Right.
Sometimes those things find them
Yes.
later. And you've certainly been found. And I understand you've been very busy since 1995.
Yes, I started my career right after graduating. I ended up working at the Housing Authority of New Orleans right out of college, and just really not like most people, not knowing anything about public housing and subsidized housing except what I had seen on TV and when I listened to local New Orleans music. That was the extent of my knowledge. And it did not prepare me for the richness, right? The issues around housing insecurity have worsened in the last few years. This is a very American problem, unfortunately, just the way that we think about housing in this country. If you go back to the beginning, the founding of this country, you had to be several things in order to be a fully vested system for all men to be created equal. They weren't talking about women. They weren't talking about Native Americans. They certainly weren't talking about enslaved Africans. But they were talking about white men who owned property. And that's something that people miss a lot of the time. And so we spent the last several hundred years trying to close that gap. And it's been a way. Property ownership has been a path to citizenship. It's been a path to wealth. It's been a path to power. And now where we are, as we exist now in this space and time, it is also the solution to so many of our problems because we haven't addressed it. So we've continued to let housing inequity be a marker of your status. And instead of a basic need that should be met, a right that should be enforced, instead it's a game that we all get to play. And too many of us lose so that other people can pretend like they're winning. And Katrina flipped the board over for everyone in New Orleans and really showed this country and the world what was wrong with how we think about housing in this country. And it's sad that almost 18 years later, we are still grappling with that. And we got another lesson almost over 3 years ago with COVID, when before you could get a mask, before you could even talk about getting a vaccine, the thing that you could do was shelter in place, was stay at home. That's what we told people to do. And no one thought about, and most people don't think about the fact that too many people couldn't do that, right? They couldn't do it safely. They were essential workers, and their homes weren't big enough for them to actually go home and isolate and not risk a vulnerable family members. They were housing insecure. They lost their jobs and they had to double up, risking exposure. They couldn't be released from prison because they didn't have anywhere to go. Kids couldn't learn. Everybody was worried about kids being back in school and Zoom being such a problem. The real big problem does that kid have a place where they can actually learn that can facilitate Zoom education? Or are they sitting at a kitchen table where there are another number of other people in a home that doesn't even have power, that doesn't even have consistent access to internet, the ability to plug in a hotspot in any computer? So that is the core. That's the foundation. That's why this is why we say put housing first, because we can name any issue: healthcare, criminal justice reform, voting rights, you name it. The failure to address housing equitably is at the root of our failure to progress on those myriad of issues that plague us as a society.
So agreed and understood. So we've defined the problem, with the challenge. Right. I like to say challenge. It's just it's a pet thing with me. I like to say challenge. So we've defined the challenge. Okay, and let's start with you can say the world, and then America, and the state of Louisiana,
and then New Orleans,
then the community. So how about we start with the city of New Orleans?
Yep.
And what are your recommendations for the city of New Orleans?
Well, that's the part that's the most frustrating. That's why you got to know it's the blind spots that we have, this bias that's so deeply rooted. Because in New Orleans, we have everything that we need except the political will to do what's necessary. The gentleman that you and your family and your organization are trying to engage with, and engaging with unity around, we actually would it blow your mind if I told you we had enough vacant homes today, not including short-term rentals, enough vacant, unoccupied homes to house every single homeless person.
That would blow my mind.
Today.
That would blow my mind.
Today, because we don't think about that. New Orleans has had for a number of years. The powers that be,
we've had telling me we have a housing shortage.
Yeah, we have a 20% vacancy rate. And have had a 20% vacancy rate in the city of New Orleans for the last 5 years.
Wow.
This is a city that's losing population. What we have is the market is not being properly regulated. Our leaders are not doing what they should be doing to ensure that everyone has access to safe, decent housing, that everyone has housing that they themselves can sustain. And again, COVID gave folks extraordinary weapons, leaders at the local and state level, extraordinary weapons to use, and they didn't use them. Weapons like, hey, you could just go ahead and pay people's rent. You could pay their mortgage, and we didn't do it. And we're still not doing it, right? There's 3 years later, and Hurricane Katrina put billions of dollars at our disposal to invest in people's homes, to help them come home after the collapse of our levee system, something that was not their fault. And we allowed the color of their skin and their neighborhood to dictate not whether or not they deserve to come home. And we look around our city and we wonder why crime is where it is. We are not investing in core issues for people, right? This is in the state of Louisiana, we've got about 16,000 homeless children. 16,000 homeless children. Over 3,000 of them live in New Orleans. And we wonder why education is a challenge, and we wonder why these young people are making what we see as unfathomable and unimaginable decisions. They are living in circumstances that we don't even deign to acknowledge, much less imagine, right? Like we know that they're happening. We know that it's out there, and we're going, well. And you see people all the time saying, well, there are choices that they can make, right? You're choosing to be homeless, and your parents are chosen to bring you up in this kind of circumstances situation. That's not the case. Like we always ask them. When I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago with a dear friend, community activist, who's really frustrated with the homeless issue near her. And she said, well, so many of them are choosing. And I said, choosing what? Choosing between what? What are the choices? And she said, what do you mean? You just said with your whole chest that these folks are choosing homelessness. What are they choosing between? What are the options? What are the options? Because that's what choice means, that you have options. What are the options? And is the option not having anywhere to go and not having anywhere to go and saying, okay, I'm going to go, and there's a nice looking place over here that's got running water, there's a rocking chair, I can sit, I can be out of the shade, or I can die in this heat, because this is heat you die in.
Yes.
And we tend to like imagine, right? I've seen on Nextdoor, people have these whole imagined scenarios, like there are all of these churches that are doing all of this great work. Name them, please. Give me an address. Give them an address, right? And our elected officials get it on the act, right? You have people going out there repeating this lie that everybody's choosing to be homeless, and even trying to put on shows of trying to pick up homeless people and bring them to shelters when those folks are not in fact homeless. They're just standing outside. And we look at people passing laws and policies that don't actually get anything done, but we want to stand up and say, I care about this issue, but I'm not going to do a damn thing about it. I'm not going to pass a law that would actually help you. I just want to talk about it. And I want to talk about how hard it is. And I want to talk about how sad I feel. And when I have all of the power, and I refuse to use it because I think deep down that you've done this to yourself and you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's the system that we have created. And so the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that and say, okay, for every homeless person, what do we have to do to help them sleep somewhere tonight? Help and go to them and talk to them about what they need and secure for them a home that they can count on. And yes, some of those folks are going to have mental health issues. Some of those folks are going to be in the grips of an addiction. Some of those folks are going to not trust the system. They're not going to believe you. So you're going to come out there and talk to them, and they're going to look at you like you're crazy. And you've got to remember that these folks have been traumatized by us. And that is something that people don't like to own, right? That's why folks often default to folks are choosing this, because it can't be you and I's fault. It can't be our fault as a society, because we're nice people. We're good people. And the fact that, and that's why we talk about the fact that it's a blind spot that people have, that they don't realize that folks are struggling in circumstances that can be changed. And New Orleans has a lot of advantages unfortunately, because of Hurricane Katrina. We are still down 100,000, mostly African Americans. There's enough room here for everyone. There's enough room today for everyone who is here today. Do we want to grow and prosper? Do we want people who are doubled up to get their own place? Yes. Do we want people who are living in substandard homes to get quality homes? Yes and yes. But we have enough. We're not taking care of everything that we have today. We keep looking for someone else, some tax that we can levy on tourists, some investment someone else can make. When we're not taking control of the resources that we have and making sure that they're being used correctly.
So you just started touching on what my next question, but I was going to also mention, I agree completely that folks like me and the general population, we're all being probably sold a bill of goods, what they call it. We're being told that nothing can be done about homeless. We're being told that they're choosing their situation. We're being told don't give them money stop at corners because that will discourage them from getting the care they need. So we're all being told these things, but and I'm totally willing to accept that we don't really know the full story at all. But what is it? I mean, what is it that needs to change? I mean, you've just touched on taxes, but what about legislation? Is there legislation that can be passed?
Oh, yeah. So unfortunately, we have gotten to an inflection point where there is a problem that is overarching all of the problems and has pushed itself forward to the forefront. Insurance right now, today. The big problem that we have is insurance. Insurance is preventing us from building new housing, housing developments that would be intentionally affordable for the average person, for the average worker, the average family, the average household. We have thousands of homes and apartments that are stuck, that can't move forward because of insurance. Mm-hmm. We have people whose rent is going through the roof because of insurance. Mm-hmm. We have homeowners whose mortgages are going through the roof because of insurance. Mm-hmm. So now insurance has pushed its way to the forefront, and that has to be done through legislation and regulation. But Sandy, the issue is that we have to embrace the notion that we can guarantee housing for all. We just closed out a legislative session where, despite some fairly decent efforts, we didn't do nearly enough to help people. There's going to be the legislature, the governor, and the insurance commissioner decided to put more money towards the insurance companies than they did towards helping people in their homes. That's a wrong-headed notion. Mm-hmm. that again, it's rooted in this bias. It's rooted in this. Well, we've got it's trickle-down economics, voodoo economics, whatever you want to call it. So what we could be doing is they did appropriate $30 million to help people strengthen their roofs, but that program has to be designed in a way, and hasn't been designed in a way, that prioritizes the people who need it most. So building technologies now are so advanced where we have new roofing systems that will actually allow for the house to hold together up to Category 3 winds. So that means if the house holds together, the roof holds together, there's less damage. And so that gets you to the point that your insurance can be cheaper. Mm-hmm. You have less repetitive loss, right? So you can make these investments. We have to provide these resources to the people who can't access them themselves. This is not a big game of keep away where we let the strongest, let the best be able to do this, because this lack of investment is part of the reason everybody else's insurance is sky high. If you have a house that is basically Fort Knox, right, when it comes to fire and hurricanes, and you're surrounded by houses that are tinder boxes, guess what? Your insurance isn't going to be that much lower, not as low as it could be if you lived in a neighborhood. So we've got with other homes that are just as safe as your Fort Knox. And there's this meanness. And so many of our leaders and our legislators, they're just like, well, we don't want to give them anything. And we've gotten so cheap and so constricted. No one has it, right? No one has the Fort Knox houses. No one has these new roofing systems. Hardly anyone has them that will do this, because we're not creating the market. We're at this point, we're abandoning even the basic rules of capitalism are not even enough to overcome the notion that, well, no, we don't want to give them anything because they keep choosing this. You should choose.
Yeah. That's the narrative. That's the narrative.
And folks don't get how the disdain of the homeless bubbles up to every one of us, renters, homeowners.
Yes.
Whenever it's the same attitude that's used against all of us.
So, Andreanecia, what today, right now, if you were to who not maybe a couple individual people, but what is the biggest thing stopping you from being able to do your important work that you think needs to be done? What is your biggest hurdle right now, do you feel?
Political will. Our leaders,
Political
will, and the fact, that's why we talk about accountability, and the fact that community members, folks are so disheartened. We've seen data that talks about the fact that in New Orleans, the average citizen doesn't have faith in any elected leadership at any level, at almost any level in the city of New Orleans, right? They're just like, they're not going to help us. And that kind of fatalism is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, I agree.
Because people are giving up. And at a time when we're so close, we're so close. And so we have to be able to stand up to our leaders and say, you all have to stop the performative nonsense, right? The shucking and jiving, the silliness, the infighting that doesn't actually result in people's lives getting better. And that is one of the biggest problems that we have, is that there's just a lot of performative. There's a lot of finger pointing. If the people in from our legislators, the people in North Louisiana don't like us. To the city council or the mayor, they all point fingers at each other, and it's just like, are any of you actually going to do your jobs?
Oh yeah. Blame anything and anyone but themselves. So, right. Not naming any particular name. So,
but all of them, too many of them are doing it. It is the majority, unfortunately.
Agree.
And yeah.
So, so political will, and I understand what you mean by that. So, if you could, a genie came out of a bottle.
Yeah, I was rubbing my finger on my nose like Samantha from Bewitched. I can't wrinkle it.
I dream of Jeannie. And she said she'll give you one wish. I mean, she's not going to give you all of the wishes.
Yeah, I can't wish for all the wishes, right?
One wish. So that way you don't have to worry if it's a stupid wish or impossible wish.
Right.
Whatever it is, you can have it. What would your wish be?
Oh gosh, my wish would be probably that we make sure, I would wish that we had enough money to address all of the disaster issues that have come up in the last 3 years, right? So Ida, COVID, the tornadoes, the freezes, right? So, because all of those disasters revealed how broken the housing system is. And if we could make sure that, like you told people to shelter in place because it was a category 1 that really wasn't, we were gonna get category 1 wins, which is what we got, but people were in darkness for almost 2 weeks, right? You had more people died after the storm than they did because of the storm. That's because of the heat. And that's what we're seeing in with the tornadoes in Shreveport.
That was Isaac. I remember Isaac well.
Yeah, Ida, same thing. And it keeps happening. It keeps happening. So it's like we can make people's homes stronger. We can make the grid stronger. And so that people aren't choosing between, like, okay, can I leave? Because I know that I'll have a home to come back to,
right? And
I'm not worried about not having my job. I'm worried about whether or not my kids are going to be safe and whether or not they're going to have a school or not. I will be able to do that. COVID, same thing. That people who are essential workers who had to go out there and risk their lives to take care of us, that they didn't risk the lives of their families by going home to a place where they could not isolate, they could not protect their family, and they bringing sickness. And we saw this. We saw COVID sweeping through households, and so much of that was people's inability to isolate. People who had been evicted or had been foreclosed on, going home to stay with family and doubling up and increasing their risk. It is. If we could guarantee that everyone was okay through these disasters, that magically, and this is the thing, we keep saying it's magical, but that's part of the reason I hesitated, is none of this is magical, right?
Of
For
course
New
not.
Orleans, it's not magic. We have everything that we need
Of course.
to help all of these folks today. We are choosing not to deploy those resources. We are choosing, I mean, right, for example, right now, we got to check the numbers because it's been this way for the last couple of years. The Housing Authority has 1,000 vouchers. On any given day, they have about 1,000 vouchers where they can guarantee payment of rent, of market rate rent to a landlord that they can't get a landlord to take. They can't get landlords to agree to take them. The landlords are going, well, I'm worried about the people. You mean you're worried about how big of a bigot you can get to be because you think that, these folks are predisposed to do something different in your property? First of all, you're a landlord. So if you're a landlord, the risk that tenants pose to your property is that's a risk. That's a risk with college students. That's a risk with rich transplants. That's a risk with natives. It's a risk. It's like owning a restaurant and people jumping out without paying a check. It happens. It doesn't happen a lot. And you don't not open your restaurant
because
right?
That might happen.
Because it might happen, but here we have landlords. Somehow we've allowed landlords to say their businesses aren't open because they can't risk that they might not get their rent 1 month or 2 months. And I'm not saying this doesn't happen. I'm saying, but that's not going to happen with these folks because they can guarantee you rent because the Housing Authority will guarantee rent. And then you get people start explaining about how the Housing Authority isn't functioning correctly. That's a public entity. It should function correctly. Again, why do we accept that public bodies like the Housing Authority and other housing agencies, they don't get to work right? But y'all would, why is that okay? Why do we not put enough money into that to function properly, while we also accept things like, our police department doesn't necessarily function correctly, but we're not cutting money to it. Nope. Right? We're not cutting, like at a time, like I called 911 the other night. Funny, to your point about current events, I called 911 the other night because I heard a young woman screaming outside my door. Her boyfriend was attacking her and chasing her. And so I called 911. She managed to get away from him and find safety in a neighboring business. And it took an hour to show up.
Wow.
He was driving around. He almost hit the people who had taken her in. And everything was over by the time they showed up.
That's a whole nother story.
And I'm not saying we should cut our money to our police departments, although I would argue that spending more than 60% of our budget on public safety is probably not the best investment. I would say we need to spread that money around to other things like housing and maybe some domestic violence programs, some anger management programs, some mental health issues for young people.
Glad, Andreanecia, I'm really glad you mentioned that. So if the genie, you wish that you could save New Orleans with more money. So that money, where the money that the genie created, where would that come from?
Well, and that's the thing. There is a genie out there already. It's called President Biden, and the Inflation and Infrastructure. I'm sorry, the Investing in Infrastructure and Jobs Act is one of the magic pots of money. The second one is the Inflation Reduction Act. There are literally billions of dollars that are going to be made available, that are being made available to invest just in New Orleans.
But that's federal. But that's decided at the federal level.
That's well, but the money's been appropriated. We just got to go get it. Oh. But we've got to prioritize. Yeah, the money's they're rolling out these programs. They're rolling out programs that we can put into to make our homes climate resilient and make them energy efficient, which will lower your utility bills, lower your insurance costs, and impact climate change, right?
Right.
Those are all connected together. And so we can go get money to do that, but we've got to prioritize that. Right. You look at the COVID money. at the state level and at the city level, the city's only taking about $32 million of over $400 million and putting it towards housing. COVID was initially a housing crisis. Evictions for Black women went through the roof during COVID. Why aren't we spending more of that money on housing? Why didn't we choose to do that? Why did we let the convention center take $200 million that they have appropriated from that we let them take from the RTA over a couple of decades, and they're gonna put it in a hotel, a publicly owned hotel?
I'm aware of that, and I'm totally in agreement with you on that. Totally, and I actually fought that at some point.
Good. But so there's a bunch of magic pots. They're not magic. They're pots of money that we keep treating like they're magic, like they're invisible. But I'm like, no, that money's right there. We should go get it.
Right. So Andreanecia, so agreed, understood. So Andreanecia, our listeners listening to the show, it's foolish. I had my awakening when there was a homeless person living on my property, and up until now, it was just something I observed. But even then, even before then, I always wondered, what can I do? How can I help? I understand I'm not supposed to give them cash at the street corners. I've been told every way to Sunday that does not help them. Because
I go back and forth on that one. I understand what they're talking about, but I always say, as a human being approaches me and says, can you help me? And in that moment, right, I totally understand, like, it's not addressing the larger problem. But if that person can get something to eat, if that person can get money together to get to some of the shelters charge nominal amounts, if they just kind of pull the money together for that, and if that person does something that I don't want them to do with that money, that is their decision. That is them doing that. But in that moment, nothing you can do. So beyond, and it's easy to talk about what you shouldn't do. What you're getting at is, what else can you do?
Right. But that's what I was getting at. I'm being. This is what I hear from people that appear to care. That really seemed a care, who told me you shouldn't do that.
No. And I understand that side of the argument. I totally do. I was just telling you why I, as someone who cares, I don't judge those folks for making that argument. I'm like, somebody came to me and said, can you help me? And yes, I'm going to try. And I'm knowing that I'm probably going to fail. What you want to know is, what can we actually do that will change it?
That's what I want to know. Thank you. Thank you, Andreanecia.
Yes. I'm sorry. So I just want to make sure, but anybody who feels bad, because they're like, well, no, I'm going to keep giving them money. I'm like, that's fine, right? The thing that you need to do, you can give them money or not give them money, but there's a couple different ways. So number one, you can sign up for Put Housing First. That is a campaign, it is a movement we have organized under Put Housing First, the Put Housing First Triad, which is what the three organizations you named earlier are. So it's working across the country, but locally primarily, to educate and engage and to give people the opportunity to lend their voice. Just like you said, you showed up for that fight, probably in response to one of the people justice movements, or a number of folks who were organizing around the rights of hospitality workers to talk about where that money, the convention center could have spent that money. We also have that kind of organizing done. So you can go to puthousingfirst.org or .com and sign up, and we will let you know when there's a fight that we need your voice for.
Right.
So that's bare minimum. You can get an email. We send emails probably every couple of weeks. There's calls to action at the federal level, at the state level, and at the city level. And so we will tell you when the fights are and tell you when to show up. If you want to engage more than that, there's opportunities to organize even more directly by volunteering and working on specific issues. We have working groups to discuss things like insurance, to discuss things like creating tiny houses for the homeless. How do we secure the resources to create home ownership training courses so people can take advantage of first-time home ownership programs? How we can address blight in a holistic and common sense way? How we can talk about short-term rentals and how we need to address that issue again in a way that makes sense so that it doesn't dwarf other issues, and also for big conversations that affect everyone, like the lack of enforcement around quality housing. So folks can join at any level they want. So the simplest thing is to join Put Housing First, sign up for the campaign. You'll get emails. You get an email at least once a week to tell you what's going on and where you can show up. And sometimes it's just a matter of you can fire off an email or pick up the phone and call someone and lend your voice. But we will also have bigger calls to action where we need you to come down. And we will talk to you about that. And then again, that's a gateway into volunteer opportunities that are more impactful. You can also join, if you're a resident leader, if you want to really fight on this issue, you can join our ROLA chapters and organize with like-minded folks like yourself who are going to be spending a lot of time learning about all of these issues. We provide all the data analysis. We do all of the heavy lifting so we can tell you where you need to be and what's going on. Because again, people don't know that almost daily there's a meeting or something going on somewhere in Louisiana and almost weekly in New Orleans where they're deciding whether or not we're going to get to live here in the next 50 years.
Oh, no, they don't know. And with your mailing list, that you can be looped in.
Yes.
You can be looped in. We're about run out of time. Andreanecia, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners who see a problem in their community and want to make it better?
So I encourage everyone to do what you have done, which is number one, talk to the folks that you see getting affected by this and listen to what they actually need. You do need to be smart. You do need to be strategic. You do need to be safe. Right. But you do need to think through the consequences, because you all could have very easily just called the police. And that would have been another person incarcerated. The police may have chased him off. And that's so much of what we are looking for is the problems to be outside of our vision. And unfortunately, the problems are so severe at this point, especially when you think about insurance, it's affecting everybody. Right. And so encouraging everyone to open their eyes and to understand that it's not your fault. It's not your failing that your insurance bill is so high. And it's not just like it's not necessarily that person who's sleeping in your doorway's fault that they are where they are. And that all of us at one time or another can use a helping hand, and that we need a system. We need a safety net that guarantees housing, whether it's Tuesday, whether it's a hurricane, whether you're a drug addict, whether you're a saint, a sinner, that because everyone needs it. Like we need air, we need food, we need shelter, and that it can't just be a cot in a room. It really needs to be a home in order for people to be at their best at all times.
Thank you so much, Andreanecia, for your very thorough and thoughtful discussion of a challenge that it's very large and it's very difficult, but very fixable.
Very fixable. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you. And thank you for your dedication to this community, to our city. And again, for wanting to look at these large scale problems and daring to say, I'm pretty sure we can fix this.
We're all in it together.
That's right.
All in it together. So thank you, Andreanecia Morris, and thank you, the listeners, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, stay with me. I'm just going to stop recording.